Well, I'm really excited now for our next panel where we'll be discussing the future of money, where things go from here, whether it be stablecoins, central bank digital currencies, or an alternative digital currency. So you've heard who will be joining us on this panel. I'm really excited to announce our three speakers that are joining us. So gentlemen, it's great to have you all on the line. First of all, thank you so much for your time today. And I do want to jump straight in, and I think, Richard, I will start with you. When we look at kind of the future of money, the future of finance and the evolution of money, one phrase that really gets a lot of people in the blockchain and digital currency space is bringing banking to the unbanked. And as we've noted, 1.7 billion people, according to the World Bank, do not have a bank account. How do we see the future of cryptocurrencies? How do we see them playing a role in this?
Okay, thanks. Well, thanks for having me on the panel. Hello, everybody. Well, obviously, we've good question to throw to me. We've been working in that space for 3 years at Electroneum, and we've got some pretty good insights, I think, into how people respond to that. Probably we're better suited to answer that question than most, I guess. So one is that lots of cryptos talk about how they're going to bank the unbanked, but they haven't really thought about the problems that faces. But actually, when you've given people the opportunity to get involved in a digital payment mechanism that they can use, then they will use it. That's what we've found, and we've found hundreds of thousands of people topping up their mobile phone airtime and data using Electroneum because we've made it easy, and that's the key to all of this. It's got to be easy. It's no good having a 40-minute confirmation time and everything taking absolutely tons and tons of time, like a lot of blockchain transactions do, and it's got to be super simple, and you've got to access it on a smartphone because that's the only access to the internet these guys have got. So once you start ticking those boxes, any cryptocurrency can be part of that solution. It just happens that's what we focused on.
Fantastic. Well, thank you for clarifying that. And now, Gavin, I would love to go to you as someone that does educate people in the realm of finance and really help to decipher what's what and how to move forward. Cryptocurrencies themselves, they're such a broad term. So when we look at categorizing them, and I do want to ask, decentralized cryptocurrencies, be it corporate issued non-sovereign bonds or central bank digital currencies, would you be able to identify and say that there's one that might be more of a front runner or more likely to be adopted than another?
Yeah, so great question, and thanks very much for having me, Jessica, on the panel. I mean, from my own perspective, there's lots of different ways of breaking this down in terms of the taxonomy and how we classify different types of money. But one thing I always like to do is kind of look at where we are right now. So the United Nations recognizes just 180 fiat currencies globally. So obviously, if you go into a crypto compare or something like that, and you look at the number of registered digital currencies or decentralized currencies that have some kind of market capitalization, it's in excess of about 5,000. So I think one thing that transpires very quickly is in any terms of technology, there's always a demand for network benefits. There's a demand for a dominant player, and obviously 5,000 into 180 or even into a handful doesn't go, and so we're likely to see a handful of winners rather than spread across multiple currencies. I think the other thing to do is just to classify the three that I always look at. And one is the decentralized cryptocurrencies, so the likes of the Bitcoin and the altcoins. The second would be non-sovereign currencies. So these are currencies that are being created by corporations, still relatively new, but people like JP Morgan, etc., probably leading the way there, as well as Facebook in the retail space with Libra. And then finally, the response of the central banks, these so-called CBDCs, which is their response to try and maintain control of their monetary system. So very exciting space, and very much a three-way split in terms of an academic perspective, at least.
And Gavin, just to touch on that a little bit more, so would you say that there's one that might be more likely to be adopted? You're calling from the UK at the moment. Is there a hindrance when it comes to regulation, for example, that we might see central bank backed digital currencies as something which might come into fruition earlier than a completely decentralized currency?
Yeah, I think this is obviously where you get into a bit of I wrote an academic article recently to basically saying that I didn't feel Bitcoin maximalists or maximalism was ever going to happen. And the reason for that is I just see as you say, the regulatory burden effectively keeping those kind of decentralized currencies at bay. I don't think that means things like Bitcoin, etc., are a bad bet, and other currencies as well. I just mean that it's going to be very hard to kind of break into that mainframe or mainstream, if you like, without sort of a very extreme economy or global macro shock. But who knows? Maybe we're experiencing that right now. So yeah, in terms of what might come to the fruition, I certainly see CBDCs as being very successful. I certainly see them being very successful even in terms of just shaking up the general currency wars that take place already. I mean, the US and China are facing off globally about sort of economic supremacy, but also in terms of which currency is going to be the primary global reserve currency going forward. And something like a CBDC is going to mean that just because the average person in the average jurisdiction is normally their entire monetary system belongs to the nation state to which where they live, where they're domiciled, we could see that monopoly starting to be broken up, and people more capably switching between currencies, not just when they go on holiday or travel with business, but actually choosing to put their money with external jurisdictions through the means of CBDC and all that great technology which currencies like Bitcoin and co have brought to the fore, really.
And Kenneth, you've worked very closely with some large cryptocurrency projects. When we talk about this move mainstream, as Gavin and Richard have discussed there, what's your take on everything?
Yeah, absolutely. And most of my experience comes within the Tezos ecosystem. And in terms of friction, I think that's a very important word when thinking from a regulatory perspective. So decentralized cryptocurrencies have come under a great amount of scrutiny recently. I can speak specifically within the US. You have this big battle between utility versus security tokens, and are you starting to issue unregulated securities? So, I see actually that being a stop to the spread of adoption of decentralized cryptocurrency, or at least acting as a speed bump. The same thing with corporate issued non-sovereign currencies. I think you're seeing that same kind of speed bump when it comes to regulatory bodies being afraid that this could undermine their traditional financial systems. So the clear winner for me, if you're going to pick between the three, would be CBDCs, simply because the internal systems are the ones that are creating these and working to provide greater efficiencies for currencies. And I'm actually curious if Gavin has any perspective on if one of the first to market CBDCs could take market share away from the US dollar as being the dominant global reserve currency. And is it simply just first to market, the product becomes more efficient and becomes more adopted? Is it as simple as that?
Kenneth, am I okay to respond to that, Jessica? Yeah, I mean,
yeah,
I don't
sure.
want to dominate too much, but yeah. So,
please go ahead.
Yeah, great point, really. And I think this is one of the great challenges. I mean, I don't know. I mean, I'm sure we all watched Mark Zuckerberg when he was being sort of questioned, etc., over in the US. And he very much the mantra and thing he was talking about, as well as all the data privacy, etc., was about this idea that Facebook, with their currency plans via the Libra Council and through the network of affiliates they've built, would be able to carry the charge to counter the threat, particularly from China, with respect to their CBDC and exactly what that would look like. And I think it's quite interesting there because obviously we talk about this kind of three-way battle for currency, but obviously in some parts of the world, such as China, it doesn't really exist as a three-way battle because the state and corporations are not in a state of tension because of the very nature of their political system. And whereas in the US, obviously that's different. You've got the Fed, you've got the likes of Facebook, lots of other very large American conglomerates and banks all kind of vying for, well, what are we going to do here? Are we going to have a nation-led response from a governmental or Fed perspective, or are we going to have one that's coming from a corporate orientation? I do think that first to market will be something that's significant here, and that probably is one of the things in this space that over the last 5 years I kind of undervalued that first mover advantage. The idea of how Bitcoin has been maybe more resilient than some of the other currencies. I thought we'd see the altcoins sort of power through a bit more, but that first to market status is very much something to be championed. So yeah, I would certainly say that's quite important, Kenneth, from my perspective at least. But I see the kind of dichotomy or the tension between the US and China, CBDCs versus corporate currencies, as being certainly the next phase of development in terms of the global cryptocurrency movement, really.
And Richard, I do want to go to you now because based on the conversation we're having and this rising apparent of central bank digital currencies, when it comes to people that actually don't have a bank account and aren't registered as a bank account owner, does that threaten the cryptocurrency model that has been forefront for an advocacy for people that don't have bank accounts around the world?
Yeah, I think the biggest misunderstanding perhaps at the moment is that there is any cryptocurrency adoption in large terms. Nearly every bit of cryptocurrency adoption that we see is actually a bunch of speculators using it because they like the idea of it, rather than true adoption because it brings a benefit or brings something to the table that they hadn't hitherto got before. And loads of people talk about unbanked and how crypto is going to help this problem. But of course, if they haven't got a bank account, they can't go to an exchange. Regulatory environment may be harsh in their country. Lots and lots of governments are nervous about capital outflow because of the anonymity of cryptocurrency. So generally speaking, I think, again, I speak broadly, but in terms of Electroneum, what we've done is we've solved a problem. And by solving a problem, we've got adoption, and it's true adoption. So real people actually using cryptocurrency. So that we've had hundreds of thousands of people that have moved cryptocurrency from one app to another app, and then from that app to another app, and from that app to another app. So we've got this sort of velocity of ETN moving around a system. Whereas when I use crypto, I mean, I'm a big believer in crypto, obviously have been for many years, but I use it because the benefit to me is I can make an international transfer really, really easily of whatever sum of money by sending some Bitcoin or some ETH around the world. And then they generally turn it back into fiat at their end, and it gets rid of the banking. So there is a benefit to it. But mostly I don't think that there is much adoption yet. So we talk about first mover advantage. How many people actually genuinely use Bitcoin in their everyday lives? And how many people earn in Bitcoin? I don't think many people do at the moment. So I'm not sure there is that much adoption. What Bitcoin has is massive speculative market penetration. So it's at the top of the tree there. And certainly we all see it in our arena as the sort of crypto gold. But I think we're all quite a long way away from true adoption. And even if a government comes out and brings a really nice working digital asset, as long as people can't get hold of it because they have to be traditionally banked, they still won't be able to get hold of any more than they will any other crypto. So you have to be able to think about all the different problems. How are they going to earn this? How are they going to then spend it easily? How are they going to overcome the fact if you walk up to someone and buy something, you've got to be able to pick it up and walk away, not wait for confirmations. All the things that we've overcome in Electroneum are problems that the whole thing needs to overcome in terms of global adoption of crypto. But they are all overcomeable, and they can be achieved. And I think that we're going to see loads of adoption. I'm a big believer in not just ourselves, of course, but crypto in general and that digital market moving forward. Sorry for a long answer.
No, not at all. So this new financial system that we're talking about here, I think it's really interesting to see. There's the innovation, and there is the main goal, and then there's that pullback of regulation, and then this kind of this back and forward to get to a final end result. And this end result is something where if we look into the horizon, I think everyone's perception of the next financial system, that outlook is different for different people. So I want to turn to you, Gavin, and just ask you, do you see a financial system where cryptocurrencies would be the backbone or the core fundamental of the global currency? Is that something which is achievable in your opinion?
Certainly achievable. I think a lot of this does depend on how we define cryptocurrencies. I think a lot of people would say a true cryptocurrency is one that's decentralized. And I think I would struggle to see a world where that played a mainstream role. I mean, just when I say mainstream, I mean, if we look at, say, the market capitalization historically over the last sort of year or two of sort of listed or sort of known Bitcoin and kind of altcoins, etc., added together, typically they were around about 1,000 times smaller than all sort of fiat money that was out there. Again, depends how you measure money, whether we talk about narrow money or broad money, etc., but pretty much 1,000 times smaller. So I almost see those decentralized currencies or cryptocurrencies as existing on the periphery, always having a role, never really disappearing, maybe increasing with time, but certainly perhaps not getting to the stage where we're able to rival the US dollar and some of those mainstream fiat currencies. I think for me, the thing that I find most interesting is almost looking at how the corporate currencies start to come through as well. I mean, corporate currencies aren't something that's new. It's been done by countless companies historically. So even people like the East India Company did this in the days of the British Empire out in India, where they paid their employees in corporate scrip. So it was a currency which they controlled and could decide where it was spent and control the pricing, etc. It was almost like a pseudo-slavery type arrangement. But obviously we're in the stage now of globalization where companies are becoming increasingly larger. They increasingly have the networking benefits. We're seeing the the big tech firms, the kind of the sort of Facebooks, Amazons, Googles, etc., increasingly starting to move into the financial services space, either through acquisition or with a desire to move into financial services, be that through currency creation or indeed through the provision of loans and financial products. So I think that for me is going to be the most interesting challenge. And I also believe that, especially when you look at say the reaction at the moment with coronavirus, with the quantitative easing, we're seeing a gradual indebtedness and deterioration of the financial creditworthiness of countries. And we're living in a world with the increasing power, if you like, or power aggregation from corporates. So I like to almost view this as the next phase of globalization, where we're going to increasingly see those corporations recognize that, look, consumers don't spend their money with the nation state. They spend it indirectly through taxation. They spend their money with large corporations. And if that can be done where we sell those consumers the actual currency as well, then let's take a go at that. Let's have a look at it.
And you've made a really interesting point there that you're right, COVID-19 did bring out, especially from the Federal Reserve, we saw printings of unlimited amounts, as they said themselves, of resources as well. So Kenneth, I'd like to turn to you now and just ask you, a lot of people would suggest, and especially people from the cryptocurrency sphere, that the next global financial crisis or recession would actually push more people into the direction of cryptocurrency adoption in a positive way, because it would show the stark difference between that and more traditional financial systems and houses. What's the perception from your side as someone that is based in the States?
Yeah, and we've been dealing with like great adversity recently, not only with inflation that's happening with the dollar, but there's a lot of society that's unrest right now, a lot of societal unrest that's occurring. There have been numerous protests in all of the major cities in the U.S. And speaking here in Boston, I even had to remove the signs off my business the other night because I wasn't sure if something would have happened. So that's just the level of unrest that exists within society, and that unrest actually translates to willingness to change. And I think the acceptance of change is what comes out of that. So not to relate two different subjects here, but I think people are now seeking that change, and it's going to take the action by the society to push regulators into a mode that enables CBDCs to be fully adopted within the states. And I think that traditional decentralized currencies are actually not as widely adopted as some would think. If you walk down the street, nobody really knows what it is. Nobody's clamoring for a CBDC. No one's clamoring for Bitcoin. There's no actual real adoption here in the U.S. outside of speculation, as far as I can see. In terms of businesses accepting this as payments, just recently I went out, downtown Boston, trying to find a directory online of businesses that accepted, cryptocurrency for payments. The businesses that did list on these secondhand websites that they accepted cryptocurrency, when we actually got to the physical storefronts, if they were open, they weren't accepting the currency because there was too much friction with training employees, and then the amount of use, it just wasn't worth their time. So, the pandemic is playing into this as well, where you're sort of creating a perfect storm that enables this sort of change to take place. And I think the last step is going to be having an authoritative figure, like a government agency, like a central bank, come in and sort of apply the technology to their product in the form of a CBDC. And then at that point, the society will be more willing to trust and adopt, because they're seeking change, and they're seeking transparency, and they're seeking accountability in a lot of aspects. And some of these products that we're talking about can accomplish that.
And that was
Can I just jump in quickly?
Yeah, please
Just
do.
one of the things you said a moment ago about the unlimited money printing. So that brings into question the whole thing for me is, what is a stable coin? Stable against what? So is it stable against gold? Well, gold's not stable against the dollar, but what's gold stable against? So the question of stable coins, everyone sort of assumes a stable coin keeps its value and everybody's happy, it moves forwards without any fluctuation. But I'm not too sure what you could possibly do with that. So if we'd have stabilized it against oil recently, of course, it would have gone right off the rails. So, and I fear the same may be true of the US dollar imminently. Where do we stabilize against? I think is a fair question, perhaps.
And just on that point, Richard, if I may, one of the things I was looking at was, what is the total value of money at the moment pre-coronavirus? And you're talking around about 80 or 90 billion dollars globally. But one of the things that we start to see there is that, the total quantitative easing package that happened across the whole world back in the 2007-2008 crisis was just too $2 billion in terms of QE that was taking place. And yet that was the first phase of the response, purely just from a US perspective for this particular incident, which kind of makes you realize almost, the kind of threat that the fiat currencies are under in terms of their valuation or debasing, if you like, but also that this isn't just like another crisis from a decade ago. This is a genuine step change in terms of money creation, which, could actually spell good news for a lot of the crypto space, I think.
And I think this is a really interesting point, because it really will shape the future of especially decentralized finance as well, because this is modernizing the way that the world works and how things operate. If we look at, imagine if COVID-19 happened when there wasn't internet in place, it would have been a completely different paradigm. So I want to ask you all now, just because we are slowly running out of time, just quickly, envisioning a new financial system with decentralized finance and digital currencies, would we see that actually a new financial system with a global reserve currency that is a cryptocurrency? Just finally from each of you, just a final comment on if it's possible and how things would be from a time frame perspective.
Yeah, I could just start us off and you guys could come in with more expertise. But yeah, I think it is possible to have a digital currency, interrupt traditional financial system. And this could be, also you look at DeFi, how can that fit into the traditional financial system, or the next financial system too, where payments, borrowing, and investing can become more automated and more written by code, right? So you're reducing the amount of fees to transact, and you're just creating more efficiencies. I think this is something that you also want to think about regulation when you start introducing these type of products too. You have like a MakerDAO product that's kind of unregulated, and to kind of look at the other side of the table, you have a StakerDAO product, which has taken a totally different approach, where they've actually issued a security token to represent the DAO voting right aspect and governance aspect of the side of their project. So as these projects disrupt traditional finance, and as they make more efficiencies and reduce certain costs, they also should be recognizing there's regulatory risk associated with doing things outside of a security token model, and they should weigh that against the prospective benefits that are being added by their product offerings. And I'd like to see more of these DeFi products take the more risk-adverse approach and add security tokens as a part of their model.
And Richard, what about you?
I definitely think that the world is becoming more primed to be more accepting of cryptocurrencies as they become more accessible. I think from our perspective, we're operating in literally, more than 140 countries. I think just under 200 countries we've got ETN users. So it's a sort of mind-boggling field of regulatory environment. But what we found is that the people that we're working with, they work outside of the regulations of anyway. So in the same way that they may well use dollar bills, and they do, because pretty much everyone in the world still has a pretty good understanding of what a dollar bill is worth alongside their own currencies. I think we're starting to see that come in with cryptocurrency as well. So the regulatory environment in the well-regulated global north is definitely going to be super critical. But in some regions, they won't care, because they're outside of the scope of government scrutiny anyway. So from their perspective, if they can use something that benefits them, then they will embrace it. It's all about benefit, really. I think risk is certainly a part of it, but benefit is going to outweigh everything if they've got a benefit.
And finally, Gavin, I'd love to turn to you and just hear your thoughts based on what Kenneth and Richard have also said.
Yeah, so I'd really echo their statements. Really, I also like Kenneth's point on the MakerDAO and some of the really interesting work they're doing there. I think that's got a lot of measure in terms of taking out some of that almost like volatility dampening in order to try and increase the utility, increase the usage, if you like. Still a lot of questions around the regulation, as you say, particularly from a decentralized model, whether that be via an exchange, decentralized exchange, or decentralized currencies themselves. But regulations are certainly the key, and I certainly see them playing a part going forward. And if finally, just before I close, if I could just say, I think I said billion rather than trillion in my previous answer, so apologies for that when I was talking about the supply of money and the QE response from the US as well.
No problem.
We always threw a couple of extra orders and maybe
yeah, should have put it in my white paper.
Gentlemen, thank you so much for providing your insights. You've really given us a lot of clarity and a lot of information to take away. I'm sure our viewers have found it really informative. So thank you so much for your time today. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Have a great day, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Thanks.